of South Africa's beauty lies in what is grown in its rich soil, from wheat fields in the Swartland to the vineyards of the Western Cape to the lush maize crops in the Free State. However, an essential part of growing crops is the abundant use of poisons to control pests and unwanted weeds. They are known as agrichemicals, and they are highly toxic and even lethal to humans. So one would assume that there are very strict regulations around unleashing these toxins and that there is strong enforcement to ensure that the public's right to a safe and healthy environment is not jeopardized. It is indeed like that in many countries, but disturbingly not in South Africa. Angela Andrews is an environmental lawyer from Cape Town, and she claims our legislation is the major obstacle. What is our legislation when it comes to agrichemicals?
Well, the current legislation dates back to 1947, and it says it was enacted by the King's Most Excellent Majesty. And notwithstanding the Constitution, it hasn't been changed.
So the legislation to control some of the most toxic substances unleashed in the South African air is 74 years old.
What's wrong with it? It doesn't mention health. It doesn't mention the protection of the environment. It merely enables the registration and the sale of some extremely hazardous chemicals.
Because it predates the Constitution, it is not geared to protect human rights like health and the right to a safe environment. Consequently, people all over South Africa could be harmed by the current use of pesticides.
That spray is very dangerous. When the people spray with the tractors, and when you pass, you can still smell that poison. When you take it in, you feel a little bit dizzy, you feel a little bit sick. Your joints also is not working very well. And look, sometimes you can feel it for 2 or 3 days.
Margaret Pitt, now a widow, lives near Rawsonville. She is convinced that her husband's early death was caused by prolonged and direct exposure to pesticides.
My husband, when he used to come by the house, he'd take the clothes off before he entered the house because he said the clothes is very dangerous because the clothes are full of poison.
He passed away 2 years ago, and our age legislation is also unable to adequately deal with the most notorious and controversial agrichemical in the world, glyphosate. It is the active ingredient in a large number of weed killers. The most well-known of these is Roundup, which is used widely in the agricultural sector, but is available for home use at your local supermarket. Roundup is the world's most popular herbicide and generates billions of dollars for its manufacturer, Bayer. In South Africa, it is used by farmers, but is also used widely by homeowners, municipalities, schools, and parks. But the glyphosate in this weed killer has been found in the US to cause non-Hodgkin lymphoma, a form of cancer. Professor David Eastman is a molecular cell and systems biologist at the University of California, Riverside.
In 2015, one agency of the World Health Organization convened to evaluate whether glyphosate could cause cancer. And they concluded that they thought it was a probable human carcinogen.
The agency that made the finding is the International Agency for Research on Cancer, or IARC, whose research is regarded as the benchmark for determining what agents might be cancer-causing. This sparked a slew of court cases in the United States, and several courts found that Roundup was the cause of cancer in the applicants. Eventually, in May 2021, Bayer agreed to settle 96,000 cancer claims for more than 200 billion rand. And glyphosate also poses a real threat to the environment. In November 2020, the United States Environmental Protection Agency stated that Roundup is likely to injure or kill 93% of the plants and animals protected under the Endangered Species Act. Roundup has become so controversial that it has been banned in about 20 countries around the world. And even in jurisdictions where authorities have not banned it, communities have begun to step in.
There are a lot of communities in the United States that are banning glyphosate or making it much more difficult to use. The University of California has basically put into place severe restrictions on the use of glyphosate.
The findings that glyphosate is cancer-causing have been disputed by many role players in the industry who do not subscribe to the World Health Organization findings. In South Africa, the Department of Agriculture has stated in 2015 that glyphosate is safe. However, in August 2021, the Cancer Association of South Africa issued a 24-page position statement on glyphosate. Professor Michael Herbst of Cancer authored the study.
Glyphosate in itself doesn't seem to be the real problem, but the moment it comes in formulation, all the other added chemicals to it, that seems to make the combination of carcinogenicity.
And Roundup is singled out in the report.
I'm totally convinced that glyphosate in formulation in the form of Roundup is definitely a cause of cancer in humans. The evidence is there, it has been proven.
We approached Bayer in South Africa for comments and they replied. When it comes to safety assessments, glyphosate is among the most extensively tested herbicides on the market. Evaluations spanning more than 40 years and the overwhelming conclusion of experts and regulators worldwide support the safety of glyphosate and that glyphosate does not cause cancer. Bayer's position is that glyphosate-based products are safe when used as directed and that glyphosate does not pose a carcinogenic risk. We asked the Department of Agriculture what their current position on glyphosate is, but after numerous emails, telephone calls and WhatsApp messages over a period of 2 weeks, they failed to answer any of our questions. Back in a 2015 statement, they indicated that if label instructions are followed, glyphosate poses a minimal risk to users and the general public. But referring to label instructions is not straightforward. Because our legislation is so old, there are no statutory guidelines as to what minimum information should be on the label of a poisonous agrichemical. Consequently, labels are quite vague and non-specific.
Now, if the label says, do not allow drift into water bodies. Is a canal a water body? What is a water body? Etc. You can imagine, interpretation of this thing will be very difficult.
And it is the lack of clarity on instruction labels that nearly cost him his life, says Francois, a farmer from Limpopo with 2 young children. He asked to remain anonymous for fear of retaliation from agri-chemical suppliers. A year ago, he started to experience increasing spells of dizziness, respiratory problems, extreme fatigue, and severe headaches. Eventually, tests that could only be done overseas revealed extremely high levels of toxic substances in his blood. He was slowly being poisoned by a cocktail of dozens of chemicals, all of them originating in the pesticides and herbicides he was using on a daily basis. These included glyphosate.
Ek werk al vir 17 jaar amper elke dag met gif op die plaas. Die aanwysings op die houers is glad nie duidelik nie en gee eintlik baie min riglyne.
The courts in the US have found that people developed cancer because of long-term exposure to glyphosate. But not only farmers and farm workers have long-term exposure to glyphosate. Millions of South Africans are also subjected to long-term glyphosate contamination through the food we consume. Studies have shown that 80% of bread sold in South Africa contains traces of glyphosate, and 53 of 81 supermarket products containing maize or soy have low levels of glyphosate. This means that you could be giving your baby a dose of glyphosate with her soy baby formula, or that the sandwiches in your child's lunchbox could contain this potentially cancer-causing chemical. Unfortunately, our outdated legislation is not properly protecting the people of South Africa against hazardous chemicals. It also seems unable to deal with the issues around Roundup we are facing today. Our legislation merely makes provision for the establishment of a registrar's office and gives no guidelines for its functioning. So the big problem is that although there is a registrar, there are no clear criteria provided in the legislation to enable the registrar to properly evaluate applications when registering herbicides and pesticides. And it gives no guidelines of how to evaluate chemicals that are currently in use but found to be problematic elsewhere in the world, like Roundup.
If that guidance is not there, the Constitutional Court has said the legislation is unconstitutional, because that legislation, by allowing hazardous substances onto the market, is potentially violating your constitutional right.
And this means that unless our outdated and possibly unconstitutional legislation is overhauled, the problematic status quo around the use of agrichemicals in South Africa will persist.